You're now listening to Alpha Leak, a podcast mini-series highlighting the most under-the-radar projects and developments in crypto. And this series is brought to you by the Blockcrunch podcast. I'm your host, Jason Choi. I'm a general partner at Spartan Capital and an active DeFi angel investor. Nothing on this show should be construed as financial advice, and my guests, myself, and my employer may hold positions in assets discussed on the show. And if you'd like for your project to be featured on this series, reach out to me on Twitter at Mr. Jason Choi. This episode is also brought to you by PARASWAP and Solana, two of my favorite projects in crypto. Stick around to learn more. In this week's The Blockcrunch podcast, we're going to talk about something that just happened in crypto and is capturing the imagination and attention of a lot of people, and that is loot for adventurers, which is a randomized adventurer gear generated and stored on chain. So as to what that means, this is a series of NFTs that are currently trading on the marketplace OpenSea, and all they consist of are a bunch of black backgrounds with some white text written on it. And each line of the white text sounds like something out of a fantasy game. So these are things like short sword or dragon skin belt, wushu, and so on. And for some reason, even though there is no game behind these items, this is literally just text on a piece of virtual paper. These things are trading up to $30,000 to $40,000 right now, and there is a fervent community generated around these things to build games or experiences, or at least promise to build these experiences on top of these NFTs. So at first, I was incredibly confused about what is going on, but it seems like this whole community has taken on a life of its own, and every single investor and developer out there seems to have an opinion about loot. So to really get to the bottom of what's going on, I'm really excited to have two people who caught this loot phenomenon very early on and are very knowledgeable about the gaming space as well. And that's Jon Kol from Galaxy, as well as Angie Dalton from Signum Growth Capital. So both of them have traditional financial background. Both of them are either huge gamers or they have spent years analyzing the traditional gaming space. So there's a lot of historical parallels that they can draw between what's going on with loot and what happened in the traditional gaming world that really helped us understand exactly where this trend will go. So I'm very excited to start this conversation with Jon and Angie. So welcome to the show, guys.
Of course. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so just to kick us off, I'd love to kind of, before we even dive into loot, because there's so much to unpack there, I'd love to kind of get your background as well. Kind of, how did you get into the space, and I guess what got you down into the rabbit hole of loot?
All right. Yeah. So I previously used to be in finance. I know that's not very compelling. I used to be in the fixed income world where at Morgan Stanley, I first sold all variants of fixed income products, anything from bonds to preferreds, and eventually became a trader of potentially the most boring fixed income instrument that's available in the United States, municipal bonds. So, I used to trade West Coast municipal bonds. These are the bonds that are issued by, municipalities, anywhere from cities, states, schools. Um, and at some point in that journey, like 2016, discovered Ethereum in its full glory from a friend, and really got very into it once I discovered this idea of like, oh my god, this is a open computation platform that anyone can do whatever the hell they want with. And I have a little bit of like a pirate tint to me, and so this just was very very appealing. And before you know it, I was just obsessed with it. Because of my fixed income background, I kind of got into the idea of mining because it seemed like the only version of a crypto bond, and eventually left Morgan Stanley to join a firm as their first like crypto investor. And from then on, rolled to my current role, where me and my partner run the investment team at Galaxy. And then what got me into loot, I guess, in the first place is I'm just a big RPG nerd. Mostly, MMOs, right? So massive multiplayer games. I spent a lot of time playing things like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars, and before that, Ragnarok and Lineage. And when loot came out, it was just like, I spent so much time chasing these types of items, right? Items that look and sound like you had to kill some type of badass dragon to get them. And I like items that sound like you have to kill a dragon to get them, and I like killing dragons to get these types of items. And then loot drops, and it's a list of these items. And so, it's really like there's no way that I wouldn't have liked it. And that was it's kind of history. I mean, I know it's crazy to say history about something that's only 2 weeks old, but I've been knee deep in it ever since.
Yeah, and it's crazy because you mentioned that you were really into RPGs and different types of video games before. But I think what really surprised most people is that when Loot launched, there actually isn't a game, and there still isn't a game right now. And the only quote unquote game I'd say is the fact that there is these lists of items, and people might be building on top of them or trying to form communities around them. What was the thing that interests you the most, especially given that there was no game?
I think the most interesting thing was definitely just how open ended it was. And so, the creator puts this, puts basically this thread for us to pull on, right? He gives us this list of items and he says it's all open to your interpretation. So there's a list of items, but we don't know how valuable they are. We don't know what stats they have. We don't know what game they plug into. We don't know anything. And in reality, it was just like, hey, use this, ignite your imagination. I don't know if he knew, but turns out there's enough people like me whose brains are kind of primed to like this, that we get this thing. We start pulling on this thread, and before you know it, everyone is running in their own direction and running with their creativity. And that's why I think why you saw so many of these, what has been called since the loot derivatives, and people building the other pieces to the universe, is because there was so much open space. And so you could look at those items and say, you know what, katanas look really interesting. Someone else can look at them and say, like, divine robes, those are super cool. And that's kind of what happened, and certainly what's happened to me, where I first saw this and I was like, well, here's what's missing around it. Let's start building this stuff.
That's awesome. So yeah, Angie, would love to hear more about your background, how you got into crypto, and what pulled you into this loot rabbit hole.
Sure. So I have a background, very traditional background in equities, technology research, and always as a specialist. And I got into following video games. Video games, I came from more of a media research background and media and tech. And video games were kind of the stepchild of media. And in 2006, when the Wii came out, I was blown away by it. And that was my first, or maybe my second or third E3 video game conference. And then I was totally hooked to this idea of video games disrupting time spent in terms of entertainment. And so I got into esports, was the first kind of esports analyst in 2015 on, kind of in a traditional Wall Street role. And then really got into crypto and the idea of NFTs. And when the standard was finalized, I met one of the gentlemen who had finalized it, and pitched the idea to do, basically to have a focus around this this whole concept, because what I saw really was this melding of time spent online, offline, and behavior in video games has been, buying and selling assets has been happening for decades. As John knows, I know he's a gamer. It's a buying and selling gold, World of Warcraft gold on eBay is just like, that's like a normal thing. And so I thought, wow, with this NFT standard, we could start to see, the several $1 billion of revenues that Epic makes from Fortnite. We could start to see all of those assets, the skins, et cetera, actually be tracked and give more ownership to the people who are buying them. And so that's what got me into it, is really the gaming perspective. I was really excited about the mass market impact of this. And I came at it, like I said, more from a AAA game perspective. The other part of it was I was really excited about Minecraft and the impact of that, and which then evolved into Roblox, and kind of this whole idea that like this hangout, this kind of hangout world is where real creativity and collaboration will start. So, I didn't see the art world coming to NFTs first. I thought it would be gaming, so I was totally wrong on that. But when I saw Loot, I was very excited because I loved the idea that everyone, that people everywhere can access it for free, at least in the beginning, and do what they want with it and potentially come together and create something great. And then the idea that so many people jumped in immediately made me think, wow, this could actually get momentum. And once it does, and we started seeing, and once we started seeing all these offshoots and projects upon projects, this is what I think is going to be really powerful, is kind of the next Fortnite type game where we have real creativity and collaboration. And I also have to say that I really shouldn't talk about what I buy or sell or own, because we are regulated. We're a registered broker dealer, FINRA registered broker dealer. But I will say, full disclosure, we do have exposure to mythical games, and that was kind of the concept there.
God, and this is so interesting because both of you mentioned AAA titles, and John, you were a player on like World of Warcraft and Diablo, and Angie, you looked into a lot of these AAA titles like Minecraft. But unlike these AAA titles, Loot didn't come up with a game, and there's no kind of central entity or company behind it. So, moving forward, who do you think will be building experiences on top of Loot, and what type of experiences are you guys foreseeing? And feel free to take it in any direction you want.
I think I think Roblox is the best. To the extent that we can draw a comp, Roblox is probably the best one, because Roblox is this universe where you can create a character and then you can jump it into any one of thousands of games that were, they're effectively like user generated, right? Other Roblox players have made those games. And I think that's very much what we're going to see in the case of Loot here. And kind of we still haven't seen games yet because, games are like this. Yeah, and games are like a labor of love, and they take a lot of time. But I think, and you can't like spin up a game over a weekend, even not like a text-based game like those MUDs. So I think you'll see those over the next 6 to 18, maybe even longer than that. But it's not going to be. There's not going to be Loot the game. There's going to be games inside the Loot universe, and that's personally how I see that playing out. And again, very much. Angie referenced Minecraft. It's very much similar to that, where like players create their own worlds, and like I can step into, to my buddy's area, or in Roblox I can step into hundreds of games that were built by other players like me, and each one has a different taste. But there's no sense of what is a unified, top-down Roblox experience. But each one of those experiences is very much top-down, right? Like a single group or a single person decided on what that one's going to look like. So I think Loot is going to be like that, where the universe is like this bottom-up emergent thing, and then all these individual groups, which within those group, it's very much a top-down approach. They design what they want to see in this world and what they want to create.
Yeah, and I also really think one of the key ingredients, I think, and Roblox is a big kind of educational playground for me, because I see how behavior has evolved. And even with my 10-year-old, somehow when I'm on a Zoom, she gets me to put my thumb on the iPad and buy another $5 of Robux. And I think that accessibility is key. And so when you have this kind of a platform that anybody can build on and anyone can create, you never know what's going to come of it. But the accessibility, I think, is really important for experimentation.
And you haven't looked at all these, traditional gaming companies before. Have you seen any precedents like this where there is not like one company that's driving the development, but really completely grassroots type of situation? Has there been like similar examples before?
I mean, I think that without a centralized entity at all, I haven't seen that. There have been other, kind of games that do. Second Life. There are a lot of games where you can create, like what we've been talking about, Roblox and Minecraft, but without any kind of centralized entity. John, do you know of any?
No, it's never happened before, and I don't think it's going to happen in this case either. Right, like the universe is, I think, going to get created in a decentralized fashion, but to the extent that any games are created, I think you'll see those coming from very directed teams. And even if it is, even if like the team is kind of like a flat organization, let's say it's like a leaderless DAO, and they're all remote and they don't work from an office, it's still going to be people in those driving the creative direction, saying, well, this is what this experience is going to look like. Because game is like film. Imagine trying to produce a film where like everyone takes it in its own direction. It would not be coherent. And so I don't think we're going to see that in this case here, but you can definitely, create a universe in a decentralized way. And Roblox, again, is just like the best evidence of that, because the Roblox Corporation, I think that's their name, does not say like, here's what the game should look like. They just give you the tools to create, and then like all the people go and they go wild. And like you could play my Roblox game and you can play Angie's, and the only thing the two will have in common is the engine, basically. So everything kind of looks the same, the characters look the same, and you can use the same character to go in between them. So here I think your character will look like something that's based on your Ethereum account for all intents and purposes, and it could jump between different experiences in the loot universe, but each experience is going to look totally different because a different top-down team said, this is my vision, this is my artistic creation.
Jon, when you and I met, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, maybe, I remember bonding with you over the idea that I had met with a dozen investors who had told me, oh, this is, blockchain is going to be great for gaming because you can take your gun from Fortnite into Call of Duty or vice versa.
That's right.
And I remember thinking, this makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
The gun, first of all, it's not even technically possible to move, a gun from one version of Call of Duty to another. But second of all, like, why would you want to do that? It's like the movie plot. Why would you want to move it from one to another? You need like it is a production, and it is the whole, purpose of a game. The building a game is for fun, and every single ingredient has to be orchestrated in such a way that it is fun and it's produced in a very kind of harmonic way.
Yeah, that's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just want to chime in and say that I think I agree that this is the first time we've seen something like this, and the more cynical side of me think that the bigger kind of AAA factories are not going to get involved, because I've seen so many times where they see something that takes off. For instance, I think PUBG, Player Unknown Battlegrounds, this massive, massive battle royale type of game. It really took off, and then big companies like Activision behind Call of Duty, right? They saw that it took off, they immediately copied the model, and all these other AAA factories started copying the models. And to me, if I were, kind of think of this from the perspective of a large gaming company, I probably would want to own the loot rather than build a game around these fairly launched loot. I would probably want to create my own version of loot and build my own community. Like, why should I give away value to this community that I don't control as a gaming company? I don't know if you guys agree with that sentiment, or do you foresee, big companies like Activision or any of these kind of big gaming companies potentially tapping into this ecosystem, or is it kind of somewhat antithetical to what they would do?
No, I totally agree. There's no chance that Blizzard or maybe Epic. Epic's kind of on an island because they have a very unique individual at the forefront, and that's why he's like the most beloved figure in the entire industry. That's Tim Sweeney. But your EAs, your Activisions, Activision Blizzard, they're not going to do that. That like you said, right? They want to own their property. But certainly, I think there's been this amazing explosion of lower budget games from smaller studios, and they are capturing the imagination of gamers around the world. Dead Cells a few years ago, Hades most recently. There's a lot of these games that are made by like a 12-person studio, where if you think of like each studio, there's like 9 studios that build Call of Duty, maybe even more, and each one of them has hundreds to thousands of people. Wow. And so that's what you're talking now, massive production. It really does look like a film. But then you think of these smaller games, those I think are going to be the ones who actually might welcome the fact that there is a lot available off the shelf for them to drop on. But again, I don't think they're going to use the original 8,000 loot bags as an element in their game. They'll probably opt to do something inside the loot universe, right? They, synthetic loot is probably like the most accessible thing that's ever happened on Ethereum, in the sense that every Ethereum address can create its own piece of synthetic loot. That might be something that a small independent studio would look to leverage and then build a game around that experience. because then the incentive from their perspective is just the same as when they build any other game on Steam, except that there might be this existing crowd of supporters who are so excited about this thing that they could actually leverage that. Um, I would be kind of shocked actually if we didn't see something like that in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll just mention Mythical again because John Linden did run, the CEO ran one of those 9 Call of Duty studios, and he really was thinking about gaming totally differently than most of these AAA. I mean, there's like a running joke that if you mention blockchain at Activision, you get shoved to the parking lot because there's just not. I mean, it's their IP. Like they don't want it roaming around. They have incredible business models already, set up to make a lot of money from that IP. And so, but I do think that, John's vision of creating kind of a playground where games within the game get created is exactly kind of, I think, the first step. I don't think we're going to go to, I think it's going to take a while for the loot universe to kind of develop. I mean, a couple of years, like you said, John, wouldn't be, I mean, that's actually, not a crazy amount of time to develop a game, even if you have a lot of money and you have a whole staff and you have outsourced creatives, and it's making a game is really hard, and it's profitable if it works, but it also, like the movie business, isn't even guaranteed to work. And so there's just it's hard. And so I think it could take a lot of time. It's just that some of these key ingredients that Loot has, I think, give it the best shot that I've seen.
Now, before I continue, I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, SushiSwap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to PARASWAP to scan for the best price anywhere, because PARASWAP aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out PARASWAP. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. I'd love to also talk about our sponsor Solana, a high-throughput Layer 1 blockchain. Now, in the past few months, I've probably talked to 24 teams building exciting new projects on Solana, and this is probably why. First, it's incredibly fast with 50,000 transactions per second. Second, it's cheap, with average fees less than a cent per transaction. That means developers can deploy contracts cheaply and also not have to worry about their apps not being composable with others, as Solana does not use any type of sharding or fragmented Layer 2 systems. Most importantly, Solana is censorship resistant, with over 950 validators today. So if you're interested in building fast, scalable blockchain applications or want to test out the existing ecosystem of DeFi applications and more, go to solana.com/blockcrunch. Yeah, and this definitely almost completely flips what we know about game making on its head, because previously all these games, even in crypto, right, Axie Infinity, Illuvium, all these games are still created by central teams. There's a group of people building the graphics, building the game experience. But this, for Loot, it's completely reversed, where there's no team and it's really just an item that's released to the community. And I think some people would even argue that the process of creating this game or thinking of what this game could be is actually the game itself. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that, and just how kind of game changing, no pun intended, that this thing really is.
I think it's in a way really game changing because it's opened up this idea of the universe creation, right? The universe, there is like this meta game that is the creation of the universe. And for me personally, that's been one of the most exciting parts, is just like, just being obsessed with this thing. It's the most fun I've had in crypto probably since then, right? Like there were 2 other events that I can remember as being this most fun. The first one was finding out about Ethereum in Zcash for the first time. Second time was probably in late early 2019, which was like really experimenting with available DeFi, like running with Compound and Dharma, and now this. And the reason it's so exciting is because like there's other people who are just like really into this, and they're just as into it as I am. And for whatever reason, all of us like care about it, and we cared about it from when it launched, and like we didn't think it would be valuable, but it was just cool. And now one person is designing like creatures, another one is designing quests, another one is building um, a different something else, right? And like all of us are collectively creating the IP in the universe, and so that to me is really paradigm shifting. Or maybe that's too strong of a term, but it's certainly a new category that's kind of being defined, where before that we never thought of universe building as this thing that we do collectively. It always seemed as this thing that one group sets up, and maybe we were doing it before in crypto, right? If you think about it, like the Ethereum universe was created collectively by everyone who's built on Ethereum, but it was never as explicitly understood as what's happening now, or at least not for me. And I think now, because there is this sense of, oh, well, it could turn into a game where it's not just about like a computation platform. It feels more explicit in the sense that there's like collective IP being created. And that I just find so cool. I'd never been a part of anything like it. I don't know that many others have. And I'm really enjoying every part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say the whole kind of meta game aspect to crypto is driving this, because we all felt that, or at least most of us felt that in our traditional jobs or whatever job we were in before, where we spent every waking moment outside of our job until we were able to make it our job. Kind of living and breathing it. And I think that is very powerful. And I was at the Christie's Tech Conference a few weeks ago, and Micah Johnson, the artist, said, buying is the new liking. And that really stuck with me, because it is, NFTs do provide a way to take out, to kind of execute on this vision that we have in crypto, which is taking out these intermediaries and kind of getting closer, like, increasing proximity between the actual creator and the user, gamer, player, consumer, whatever you want to say. The closeness that you feel. I mean, he said, I know who my super fans are. I know who my collectors are. They're basically voting with their feet by buying. And also, I know that there are no intermediaries. I know that there's no advertising here. I know that there are no bots here. It's just so much more authentic. And so if, in terms of like, I do think I've always thought that we have to get to a world where it's like my 10-year-old who puts my thumb on the iPad. It needs to be smaller amounts of money that is going into these things. But you could kind of see this whole world kind of atomizing into smaller and smaller bits, where buying is the new liking, or buying is the new playing. Even if it's very small amounts, your behavior and your true kind of like, I guess, whatever is really guiding you is getting recognized as value by the creator of the game. And that, I think, is really, really powerful. And I think we're going to get there by just this movement where we can't not do it versus any kind of a business model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this point about buying is the new liking is so quintessential to NFTs as well, because that's how people participate, by buying these NFTs. And that's how people got involved with loot early on, by, I guess, not so much buying, but minting these loot items. And I think now we have a rough sense of, who is involved in loot, what type of developers we can expect to build on top of loot. It's going to be the indie guys, not necessarily the big companies. I like to now kind of put our investors' hat on and think about, what would help loot persist, right? What would give it its Lindy effect? Because part of the downside that comes with, I guess, being a completely open and democratized process is that anyone can launch a loot. And we've already seen that in the past 2 weeks, right? John, I think you alluded to a few of them. There's also Bloot, there's like X loot, there's M loot, there's all these different forks of loot. So what makes the first loot different from all these other forks, and how do you establish, a persistent Lindy effect in an environment where anybody can just fork you, and there's actually not much in terms of actual gameplay that's actually even developed, so it's very easy to fork?
I think, in general, it is hard to think about a Lindy effect kind of this early on, right? Where on Friday it'll be 2 weeks old. But if you saw things kind of staying, or either staying flat or kind of like only escalating with time, then the things that would have in the future been considered to what gave loot its Lindy effect will certainly be the amount of excitement and kind of developer activity around it. Which is, again, if you think of the investor hat on, that's right. That's the adage: it's follow the developers. Um, Here, whether it's in the main loot Discord, kind of looking at what happens in any of the builder chats. There's also a separate loot builders Discord. It's one of those places where you can get a question answered by 3 different people within like 30 minutes of asking it, because there's just so many people with eyeballs on it and who are participating. um, and that's the best defense against forks, right? Ethereum's persevered, Bitcoin's persevered, because there's just this interest and excitement around it, and people are just dismissing the other things as just not being interesting enough for them. And it's hard to quantify why one thing is interesting and the other isn't, but for whatever reason, right, this original thing is quite interesting. So I think we want to probably delineate between things that look like genuine forks and things that look like extensions. And so if you think of, let's say, B loot, that's clearly like someone just saying, hey, I saw this thing, it looks cool, I didn't get a chance to benefit economically from it, I want to benefit economically from it, so I'm going to fork it. um, and that's what B loot looks like. And then there are things that want to kind of extend the accessibility of loot, and so that's X loot, which was the first loot extension, which is someone just said like, hey, let's mint another 8,000 of these bags, and instead of black background and white text, it's white background and black text. uh, then you had Dom, the original creator, saying like, hey, you know what, we want this to be super accessible, and so he creates mloot, which again is another million or something loot bags, and will have inflation that looks, at some rate, I think it's 1/10 to Ethereum's block production. And he also created synthetic loot, which can be claimed effectively by any Ethereum address. And so those to me actually add to the Lindy effect, because they're saying this thing is so cool that we just want to make it even more accessible, versus something like Bloot, which says, no, 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 I want to create like a parallel, I'm forking it, I want to live in my own universe, right? The M loots, the X loots, they want to live in the loot universe. Bloot does not.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think of it as kind of a um, follow the developers and visualize the developers as this amoeba. It might be floating around, but go wherever that is going, because that is where you're going to get the activity. I mean, all these different things can pop up, and if they don't get traction, they won't get momentum. And accessibility, as you said, John, I think is key.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It really does seem like the community is the moat for now, if there is such a thing as a moat. And I think any project that comes with any type of pre-mine or any inkling of of a desire to kind of benefit a small group of insiders is immediately going to be shunned, because this community started completely open and the minting was completely free. So I think that kind of guiding philosophy is probably going to be one of the things that help establish a Lindy effect, if there is a Lindy effect at all. And I also love to kind of continue putting on our investor's hat. I know both of you had extensive experiences in finance before. So when you think about these things in the more boring context of an investment, right? How do you think about, how do I value this thing? Like when you look at this JPEG with some text on it, how do you tell yourself that, hey, how much is this? How much can this thing possibly be worth in the long term? Do you guys have like a framework for that, or is it kind of harder to do that?
I tell you, Vermont, I think it's actually really hard, because there's a part of you that wants to say, oh, maybe they'll be used in games, but like I was saying before, I actually don't believe that the original loot will be used in game, except for maybe like cosmetic reasons, right? Because in games, probably the biggest insult you can throw at a game is to call it play to win or pay to win.
Mm,
Meaning like competitive players don't want to play a game that someone can buy their way into prominence. And so there's not going to be, something that you could look at, oh, well, this should be valuable because if the game is really cool, someone wants to pay more to be better at it. Someone might want to pay more if these are used in some games as cosmetic items. But I view them more of like as, they're going to the extent that the loot universe becomes large, has a Lindy effect, and is something that we're talking about in 2025 and again in 2030. Then I think, yeah, these original bags will have a lot of value to them as the seeds to the universe, and someone will want to say, well, I own one of those seeds, very much the same way that people are now valuing punks.
mm,
It's hard to say like, oh, well, why is why is this punk more valuable than the other? I guess in punks there's explicit rarity that does not really exist in loot. Loot has kind of like arbitrary rarity. The only explicit rarity we have in loot is like following what the software dictates, something being more rare as in less likely to happen. But for whatever reason, some items have been kind of memed into prominence, and people like them, myself included, and they seem to be more valuable right now. But I don't have a strict valuation formula. It's just these are the seeds to this new universe. If this new universe catches on and materializes and becomes a thing that perseveres, then I just think they will have value as these artifacts.
Yeah, I would just say it's too hard for me to even answer the value now. It's like, what is the value of a piece of art almost?
Mm.
It's not, I mean, not that this is art, but I just feel that it's very nebulous and we won't know until we see user activity. In thinking about some of these higher end NFTs, I have been concerned that there's only the access to those is, pretty limited. And even after going to guilds and, this group buying, it's like going in on a house in the Hamptons or whatever. I mean, that works to an extent, but it doesn't get to the masses. And so I just think we have to wait and see, based on activity.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, and I think just based on what you guys just said, it sounds like you guys almost view these loot items as more than just in-game items. Because John, you mentioned that people may not even be using these in games, and Angie, you mentioned that these look like art. So, to what extent do you think these things can be considered cultural artifacts that may even exist independent of a game? Say, like 5 years down the line, if there's still no game that's built around loot, can loot still exist? Will it still have value?
I
I
think
think
so.
so. In the
Oh, sorry. Go
same
ahead,
way,
Angie.
yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think so. In the same way that, cultural artifacts. I think, yeah, like CryptoPunks, as you mentioned, and the Bored Apes. I think there are a lot of others that are going to have. Josie Bellini is my favorite artist in crypto. Like, there are a lot of pieces of art that are going to be cultural artifacts because this is a whole new kind of way of being. It's breaking a lot of new ground. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, I very much agree with it. I do think these could become cultural artifacts. Now, I think that the hard part is a universe in which loot perseveres is probably one where there are things like maybe they don't look like a traditional game, right? But they look like different experiences and stuff that's created around it. If there is none of that, then yeah, they'll still be cultural artifacts, but just no one will care. There's many cultural artifacts that just no one cares about, right? You know, there's probably a ratio of like 1,000 to 1 on
Mm.
cultural artifacts that no one cares about to ones that people do care about. So if there is no plethora of games, if there's not even one, right? If there's no other experiences being built around, if there's not this stuff created around it, then the loot universe is like a very empty place, and no one's going to care about these cultural artifacts. I don't think that will happen, but I don't know. I've been wrong before about lots of
It,
things.
it, it could happen. It could be one of those things in 20 years when we look back and like feel good about looking back on loot, and it's a cultural artifact, but it's just like, and then the moment passes and
Yeah.
we go on to the next thing. It could happen.
Yeah, it is very hard to tell, just given a lot of the most random NFTs that I personally don't think should have any value are, perceived as incredibly valuable by a lot of people. So I'm definitely not the expert here. But I think as we come to the last part of the discussion, I'd also love to talk about, the future development of this loot phenomenon, because right now there, I think, is a hint in the community that there will be some form of governance, maybe surrounding the the AGLD token. What do you guys think will happen in terms of how this project will be governed in the future? Is it going to be like a token governed type of situation? Is it still going to be as amorphous as it is today, or what type of structure makes the most sense?
So I'll tell you what I think would make the most sense. I don't know what will happen. I think what makes the most sense is that there will be governance at the loot level,
Mm.
where that is. So the last week there was a party bid that where 20% of the proceeds were given to loot for like to use for grants and for ecosystem funding, right? So now that's an amount of money, give or take, 30 something Ethereum, and something needs to decide how that money is governed, right? There's going to be future instances of that, right? Like what happens with secondary fees, which right now there are none. So stuff like that will be governed, I think, by loot holders or some variant thereof, because Dom creators kind of made it clear that he does not want unilateral say over it, which I think is a good thing. Then I think you can imagine there being other entities in the loot universe, A-Gold being one of them, which should have their own token governance. Right, there was a proposal the other day to use A-Gold as the governance token for loot. That I think is just preposterous. We wouldn't use a different token to govern another network. And so same here, but I think A-Gold can still and probably will be useful and valuable without having any governance right over loot. All right, it could still be like the in-game currency adopted by some of the games that are built around it. You can imagine a world where I submit a proposal as a game developer to the A-Gold DAO or treasury, and I ask them to give me some grant, either one time or over time. And then I allow players in my game to both earn and spend A-Gold, right? You could imagine if it's a Diablo-like game. Maybe I use A-Gold to buy things from the NPCs. Maybe I earn A-Gold when I complete quests, when I finish certain battles. And then similarly, I could pay A-Gold to like reset my skills, to fix my gear, to do all sorts of things. And in this universe, right, like someone built a loot-verse game. I can use A-Gold as the currency for it because I kind of petitioned them to give me a grant. It might even be a net deflationary thing, right? Because like maybe my players are spending more A-Gold in the game than they are buying it. And there'll be incentive to just go to the market and buy A-Gold to use it in the game. And so that's how I personally see this playing out. And I don't think A-Gold will be like the last of these, but I'm hoping for governance being distinct to each entity and not being, one asset that governs them all. I don't want to see a one ring situation.
I was thinking the same thing in terms of choice. I hope that A-Gold will not be the only choice, because I think that it'll just cause a lot of drama and infighting, and I think that every team should be able to develop and make the choices they want, that they want to make.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's so much happening with Loot right now. So as kind of early, I guess, adopters of the game or early supporters of the game, what are some resources that you recommend for listeners out there to keep track of what's going on with Loot? And what are some resources that you personally love to follow?
Right now, the best one, although it is getting harder to follow because of the amount of activity, there is the main Loot Discord. And the second best, if you wanted a more like asynchronous type of discussion, there's the Loot Talk, which is kind of, think of it as like the new forum. There's been, there's a TechCrunch article from last week that dissects the loot phenomenon. That's a useful one, but I think those are kind of a good places to start. And I use the Discord and the governance forum kind of on the daily so far.
There was a Decrypt article that I read yesterday that was good as well. I think Jon Kol is going to be my go-to source.
Got it. Yeah, I'll definitely list those resources in the links below in the show notes. So listeners, if you just go scroll below the episode, you can find those things. Well, Jon, Angie, thank you so much for taking the time on such short notice to discuss this crazy phenomenon. We learned a ton, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. And I'm sure we're going to probably do another episode down the line once this becomes, the next mega crypto phenomenon. So thank you so much for taking the time for this. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Good to see you, Jon.
Good to see Angie.
Okay, bye.